Welcome to the program. My name is Kareem Kanji. Thank you so much for joining us. For those of you who don't know, I'm the host here, as well as partner co-founder at thirdocean.com. Have an exciting program today. We have a guest here, the president of Ambit. Just a little bit of an introduction. He has been called the brightest young mind in social media here in Toronto. His work with brands such as Expedia, ING Direct, TicTac, Canadian Living, Intact, and presently working with a number of different clients, but most notably Nike Canada. Please welcome to the show, Anthony Zanfini.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. How are you?
I'm very good.
Excellent. We go way back.
We do.
Yes, the first incarnation of this program, which was called Social Media Show, SMS.
It was.
Back in 2010.
Yes.
Which seems like forever ago.
Second show.
Yes.
Ever.
Back when dinosaurs roamed, I think.
Yeah, I don't think social existed.
No, it didn't. It didn't. But congratulations on the start of your, I guess, newish agency. You've been around for a little while.
Yeah, just over a year.
So congratulations on that. We're going to talk sports and social media. We're recording this the Tuesday before the Super Bowl.
Yep.
Obviously, the NHL season has finally started. Here in Toronto, everyone's talking about the Toronto Blue Jays.
Yep.
So in a big city like Toronto, sports is always a conversation. And so we're going to take a little deviation from that and talk about sports and social media. But let's start from, let's talk a little bit about yourself and what you're doing. You've got Nike Canada as one of your clients. We talked a little bit prior to the show, a little bit about how that relationship was formed. Why don't you share a little bit about that and some of the things that you're doing with Nike?
Absolutely. Primarily currently focusing on the Nike hockey business, but I've worked on Nike as a brand in Canada for just over 2 years.
All right.
Previously with one of their digital agencies at the time, Organic Inc., and then began consulting for them independently. And currently, myself and the team at my agency oversees digital strategy and execution on the Nike hockey business. But lucky enough to have worked on the Nike running business in Canada, the Nike sportswear business as well. So it's been a great 2 years working on that brand.
Yeah.
A great brand to have the privilege of working on it. Few people get that opportunity in their careers.
True, that is so true. And so very curious, hockey is a winter sport.
Yes.
But here in Canada, it's a 12-month conversation.
It is.
What has that been like in terms of, working specifically on Nike hockey? How has that been over the past year? Did the strike have any sort of impact on the work that you do? What happens during the summer months? I'm curious about that.
Well, I think what you're seeing now with hockey in general, especially at an elite level, whether that's the pros or whether you're looking at that AAA teenager, is that hockey is now a 365 game for most of these kids. They're playing hockey in the summer, 3-on-3 or whatever summer leagues. They're training off the ice for that in season, and the growth of and the focus on training at a pro level in the last kind of 10 years has really taken off, and I think that in a way has transformed the game itself. One of the byproducts of that is you see a lot of younger players having an impact sooner in their careers. Less guys, a lot of these high draft picks are going to the minors, right? Or going back to junior, because they're in better shape. They're more prepared to play against the man. And I think that has transformed not only the game for the players and the leagues, but also for the brands associated with that. Hockey is a 365 conversation for any of the brands in it: Reebok, CCM, Nike, etc. And to feed the appetite of the consumer, the brand has to act and offer up service, product, and opportunity and insight accordingly.
True. What are some of the things that you've done with Nike?
Nike, we've done a lot on training. Nike has a deep relationship with Gary Roberts, who is a big-time NHL trainer, trained Steven Stamkos amongst others, as well as Matt Nickel, another big name in training. And with those two guys being the face of it, Nike has actually offered training services, training insights for the consumers. There's a whole YouTube series on the Nike training channel on YouTube, and that is a hockey-specific training regimen. There's two off-season versions and an in-season version as well. And that offers insight into what the pros are doing so that consumers can emulate that. At the time when the first iteration of the program was launched, and this was in the summer of 2011, it's actually a series of annotated videos connected to each other, and it was the largest series of annotated videos ever published on YouTube. I believe 94 videos and, and 100 plus annotations. So every video is actually linked together. So like a web experience, you can land on any video in that series and follow along in this 12-week program of training throughout the summer. So that's been a big endeavor for Nike. And I think that's, for all brands, as that becomes more of a focus for the players, it naturally becomes more of a focus for the brands that endorse with, that they're endorsers of, and the brands that work with.
Sure. Let's talk about, what's happening in the landscape. Let's talk about leagues. Here in Canada we have the CFL.
We do.
And the CFL has been very active on social media. In fact, the first guest this season was Jamie Stein, who was previously the manager of digital at the CFL. Back in 2011, according to Hootsuite, Grey Cup 2011 was the #1 trending topic in Canada. I mean, what does something like that mean for the CFL? Are vanity metrics like that important? Do they tell a bigger story?
I think that's symptomatic of hopefully a shift that is a positive story for the CFL. I look at the CFL, it's a smaller league, it's a niche league, obviously being in Canada only. They should be happy that they're getting that type of traction with consumers.
Sure.
But that being said, like the Super Bowl or the World Cup final, it has to be beyond a specific sports moment. That's great and fleeting for that moment in time. Does that translate to button the seats? Does that translate to viewers on TV? Does that translate to sponsorship dollars? Probably remains to be seen. And that's maybe part of a larger story, but that is only one piece of it. But I think, it's great for brands like that, brands that are, let's say, more local, more nimble, to embrace, newer technologies. There are some brands in some categories that were late to the party when it comes to social. Even some of the big four leagues in the States, some of them were late coming to social and late having guidelines for their players in social. So, looking at a brand like the CFL, the ability to embrace things, to try things, to be different, I think part of it is inherently, the nature of the competitive landscape they're in. And any way that they can better and more deeply connect with the consumer is going to be a positive for them.
True. Is there... The NHL, remember the NHL, I can't remember what year it was, doing some campaigns with Foursquare, checking into arenas. And I'm curious whether or not and at that time it was like, wow, this is new, this is innovative. But that's kind of like old news now. Getting your team to trend locally or nationally, it's okay. What sort of things have you seen, or what would you like to see teams do, or leagues do?
I think, the first question is probably more valid, is what can teams do? And I say that because they can connect with, people associate themselves with teams more than the league. I consider myself a hockey fan. I consider myself a Montreal Canadiens fan. I'm not a fan of the NHL. You don't hear that often. So I think in localized markets, I think that's where you can have deeper connections with consumers. And that's everything from, it could be scavenger hunts for tickets. It can be, something similar to what the Leafs did with their home opener just ahead of it, putting jerseys in ice blocks and using social to encourage people to break them down, or getting people to retweet and follow them for tickets. You can be creative. I think the key is and I look at this as a platform. One of the things that I recommend to a lot of the clients I work with is consumer experiences are changing. Brands are now, they have to be experienced. They can't be taught in one-way communication.
Yeah.
I think one of the most powerful ways to do that is to find a crossover of different experiences. The experience can be a physical experience, it can be a digital experience, it can be a print experience, whatever that is. And I think some of the most powerful ones are in the digital and physical overlap.
A lot of crossover.
Exactly. So when you can do something localized, engage with the consumer, engage with them on their device, engage with them as a person, engage with them at the arena. I think teams have the ability to do that. And when you do, you have powerful connections, you have powerful stories coming out of it.
Do you think that, and I'm going to use a local team here as an example, but it seems to me that, you don't really need to do a lot in social, or there's no real push to be so innovative, when you are a massive brand. For example, I want to talk about the Blue Jays. Really no need to really be so innovative in social, or there could be a thinking that, you don't need to be innovative in social. You're covered in the papers, you're on the Sports Center and Sports Line. You're going to be on all the TV shows and the magazines and so on and so forth, right? All the games will be on the radio, they'll be on the television. What more do you need to do in social? Is there, there's that question about the value and stuff. And so I see laziness creep into it. So a couple of things. I used to use the BlackBerry quite often, and I subscribed to the BlackBerry Insider, the Blue Jays BlackBerry Insider. One-way communications.
Yes.
It was like you try to message them, you will not hear back. They will let you know every day some tip or something interesting about a player or some interesting fact about the team, or that they've got a sale going on Blue Jays jerseys. And it was very annoying to get those messages and not being able to communicate back, because that's what I was using BlackBerry Messenger for. I was talking to my brother in England, I was talking to my sister living in a different part of the town, I was talking to friends on there. It was a two-way communication, and here were the Blue Jays using it as a one-way communication.
Yes.
And then they come up with this concept of tweeting Tuesdays. They will tweet to you and tweet back to you and engage with you on a Tuesday game, but it seemed anywhere else they were not to be found. There were those 10 messages that were probably scheduled the week before that would go out, but there would be no engagement throughout the season or throughout the day or throughout the week, except on tweeting Tuesdays, which is a good place to start, but not a good place to stay.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on teams not really being innovative?
Well, to your point of the Blue Jays, you're exactly right, is that was probably them testing the waters on Tuesday to see,
But now we're going into our third year of them using.
Yes, and that's it, right? And that's your point about why our team's not innovating.
Yeah.
Yes, to an extent, there are going to be people that are going to have that same view that you started off with, which was, we don't need to do this.
Yeah.
Right? We're in the TV, or we're on the TV, we're in the papers, we're in the magazines, people are already talking about us. I think that's an old way of thinking. And I just look at, it comes down to whether it's a sports fan, a sports brand, consumer confectionery product, whatever it is, ultimately it's understanding your consumer. And something like that shows to me a lack of understanding of the consumer. If you look at how people are consuming television now, 34% of people that are actually watching TV with a tablet are going to be searching about that topic, right, or that television show. You have, I think it's 28% and just over another 25% that are going to be looking for product information as well, of something they may see from an advertiser or in the broadcast.
Yeah.
And I think that's on tablets, and on phones it's probably even more, being the penetration is that much higher.
Sure.
So TV now, whether that's watching a sitcom or watching a sports game, whether you're for sports, whether you're in the seats in the arena or at the stadium, or whether you're at home, is a multi-screen experience.
That's right.
And I think not tapping into that is a missed opportunity for a lot of brands. That's a consumer mindset, not just of the future, but we're seeing it into a consumer mindset of the present. And I think adoption rates, of a team not innovating, that means that they're not following with the consumer trends of the adoption rates of when they're using device, X and Y,
Yeah.
to interact with them as a brand. So, is it necessary? I'd like to say yes.
Yeah.
I think it is if you want to really be a pinnacle brand in your market or in your league.
Sure.
Will teams survive if they don't? I mean, I think you see that most can, just because of the legacy, but that's not an excuse to not be innovative.
Well, let me ask you this. So let's take that conversation to hockey.
Yes.
So we've just gotten through another NHL lockout. Here in Canada, going to hockey games is like drugs. You just go. You can be mad at the players, you can be mad at the owners, but as soon as the NHL starts, people go to their teams. And you're right. People don't really love the NHL, but they had some very passionate feelings towards it one way or another during the lockout. But when it's over, they become fans of the game again. They become fans of their team again.
Yes.
They're going to go to the games. There's a question or an argument that could be made that, did the Leafs have to give away 1,000 free tickets or not? Was there really a need for that, for them to fill out the building? Probably not, but it's a big goodwill gesture.
Yes. Yes.
Beyond anything else. But can teams survive? So let's not talk about, you and I, you're a fan of Montreal. We live here in Toronto. I can't say I'm a huge fan of the Leafs, but they'll do fine. But let's talk about some of these Sunbelt teams. Some of these teams that are on the brink, teeter-tottering. What role, is there a role that, I don't want to say social media, but is there a role that connecting with your fans can play to improve the fortunes of a team? And lo and behold, I think social is a tool that could be used.
I think it can as part of a variety of tactics. So you're coming back to measuring social ROI, which is difficult for some brands. In those cases, if they could, tie butts in the seat to a ticket giveaway on social, easy peasy in that regard.
Yeah.
And you're seeing brands do that, right?
Absolutely.
Flash sales, scavenger hunts, things like that to give away, create some excitement. I think for some of those Sunbelt teams, if you look at Phoenix, last week had less people in the stands than empty seats for the first time in a while, even though they've, 17,000.
A pretty decent team.
Yeah, 8,000 plus fans, in that range. A team that went to the Western Conference Final last year. So, is there an opportunity for those types of teams? I think it's more of an opportunity than for some of the legacy teams.
Sure.
Legacy teams, they'll survive with that. They don't need to give away free tickets. It's a goodwill piece. It's
Yes.
a way to build some more affinity for the brand. But in terms of can social help those teams in the Sunbelt survive? I wouldn't go that far.
Sure.
But I do think it's a way for them to at least try and build a fan base, and it's going after the younger consumer, right? Trying to convince the younger consumer that in Florida or in Arizona that hockey's for them is difficult if they haven't grown up with the game like Canadians have. So they have the opportunity to be more creative, let's say, probably a little more liberty and a little more flexibility to do so, and good on them. But will it save their franchises ultimately? Probably not.
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to be the only thing, but there's a role.
There definitely is. I think you can engage with the consumer. I mean, ultimately, whether you're talking about a hockey brand or any other brand, you have to look at what does your consumer want from you in social? Why do they want to follow you? The biggest reasons are information. Information that's exclusive or sooner or faster than other people can get. It used to be promotions and giveaways.
Yeah.
That's now becoming less and less of a concern. They still love it, don't get me wrong.
Sure.
People are
They
all
want a
over
deal.
that.
Everyone wants a deal.
They want it, but it's not the most important thing.
Yeah.
And then now you're seeing more and more people follow brands or teams just because they are advocates.
Yeah.
So if you can tap into those consumer insights, harness it, use them, and find creative solutions to really bring those to life, I think that's where you're finding a winning combination for a consumer brand experience.
I think there could be a case study. I'm going to switch it to a totally different sport. I think there could be a case study made that without social and digital, the UFC wouldn't be where it is today. I mean, here's a brand, and I think being privately held plays a role in what they're able to do. But here's a league that is almost a sport in and of itself.
Yes.
When people talk about the UFC, they're really talking about MMA.
Yeah.
And when people are talking about MMA, they're really talking about the UFC.
Yes.
Most people. But here's a league where the owners, all of the fighters, the announcers, they're all active. The brand itself.
Yeah.
Not just all active on Facebook and Twitter, but very active in digital. You know, whether it is their website or whether it is their iPhone and Android apps, very active all the time. It's not how should we integrate social into this? It seems to me they lead.
Yes.
They're leading with digital, they're leading with social, they're leading with mobile, and everything sort of joins in to that conversation. I'm curious if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, I think they're a great example of a brand or an organization who's adopted social as a culture and a top-down,
That's right.
manifestation of that. It's not seen as this is just a communication tool for us anymore. It's a brand building tool. Obviously there's synergies with the consumer that they're going after. They're going after the young male consumer. That is the consumer that tends to buy the latest gadgets and be the early adopters of new technologies, be a little more experimental. And I think by having it having a social, I would say, spirit or a social kind of fabric woven into the brand, not just the language but how they operate, is the way that they've allowed that to work. It's probably a mandate that their athletes are social, and I think that's been very, very carefully calculated and done very well, because it's allowed them to be different. Again, like the CFL, a brand that is, in a way can write its own rule book. Doesn't have the legacy of an NBA or NHL. A little less conservative in that regard, and I think that's a great example of where the type of technology, the experiences, everything that embodies digital and social plays well and ties and marries perfectly with the brand values and the attitude of the UFC. Do
you think we'll ever see Gary Bettman going on Twitter and slamming the referees for a bad call?
I doubt it. They won't even let the coaches do that.
They won't even let. It's because it's very interesting. Dana White literally will say anything. We'll talk about the judging, we'll talk about the reffing, we'll talk about the fighters, and just very, very open. And you're right, it's part of that culture of the league. And it's really helped them to capture a larger market share, to capture the interest and the attention of a very prized demographic. The same demographic, I would argue, that the NHL wants, that the NFL wants, that the NBA wants. Do you think there are lessons that these other leagues can learn from what the UFC has done?
Well, I think inherently the biggest difference between the Big Four and the UFC is that, you could argue that the Big Four are power brands and the UFC is a challenger brand. And that's how they carry themselves, their brand values, the brand personality, how they communicate to consumers. Are there lessons there? I still think that there's definitely opportunity for the big leagues to be more open or be more transparent. And I say that because the sports, back to our earlier conversation, are now 365 games. If you look at the reasons, again, that people follow brands, if one of them is access to information, well, why should an NHL or an NBA basically shut the door on what's going on with their athletes in the summer? Right? One of the reasons that athletes have become so popular in social is because it gives a window into their lives that the leagues weren't giving before. Right? Once the September 1st training camps open for the NHL and the Stanley Cup was handed out June 30th at the latest, you didn't really hear about anyone else. You didn't really hear about what they were doing in the offseason, etc. So I think players having, in some instances, getting to social before the actual leagues or teams have helps to open that up. So I think there are some lessons, but again, it has to be within the fabric of the brand and what they're about. So an NFL, for example, huge brand, huge affinity for that sport as a whole. It's a cultural fabric of America, especially in the South, and they're doing some interesting things in digital. And I think what you're going to see as well is as more of these leagues are fueled by TV dollars, by sponsorship dollars, those brands want to use digital.
Yes.
And they want to be able to leverage the intellectual property of an NFL or an NBA or an NHL. And I think that as well will help to propel some of these, let's say more conservative leagues forward.
Interesting. I mean, we could talk here for like hours on end,
sure
about sports and social media. But I want to end off with, talking about, upcoming 2013, and not necessarily sports related, but just before we got in, I asked you, you've got an iPhone, and I asked you about Vine, and you said you got it, and that seems to kind of be the first sex and new tool of 2013.
Yep.
Your thoughts, and you talked about some, you're looking at it from a client perspective as well. What are you seeing from Vine in its early days? It's been out less than a week.
Yeah, it has, and I think a common theme, I think you'll pick it up, is that it has to make sense for the brand, obviously, and what they're doing. I think there's some interesting aspects of that tool. I mean, yes, you could film video previously on your iPhone or whatever the device is, and you could post that to Twitter. The integration with this, I find a bit more seamless across platforms. Vine is a new network in itself, but inherently tied to Twitter. But it seamlessly posts to Facebook very nicely. The playback options there. You're not worried about a link that doesn't play. It is a player embedded. I think there's a variety of things, really early, but certain brands that want to solve consumer issues. How easy would it be to do a product demo with Vine and use that as the response? And you can literally do that in a couple of minutes if you have the product and the right people involved. I think that's an interesting piece for solving consumer problems or any consumer service issues. I think that's one of the areas that I'm interested to see how brands are going to do that and if they're going to go that route. Because yes, lots of brands are putting videos on YouTube and downloadable podcasts or content or whatever. But this being so short and many of those answers and everyone wanting answers in real time, this really allows them to do that. I think it could be an interesting use there.
Interesting.
So I mean that's one of a variety of ways that it could be used. And I think to your point, it's been out for less than a week now.
True.
I haven't seen, at least early, any kind of case studies or stories of brands really adopting it as of yet.
I'm sure by the time this comes out in a week's time, there'll be a bunch of brands.
I'm sure there will. I'm sure there will.
Already on it. What's the last question? What's the over/under in how many months it's going to take Facebook to come up with a Vine competitor?
Oh, I think probably 6 months.
6 months?
Yeah.
We'll take the over/under on that.
I'm gonna take the under.
The under?
I think just because they have the opportunity to purchase, right? If they have to.
True.
Instagram.
True. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. We'll have to do this again.
Absolutely.
It's just a great topic. And I think I said that to you the last time we spoke back in 2010. But we did do it again. But we won't wait so long. Where can people find you? Where can they find your company? How's the best way to connect with you?
Best thing to do is probably follow me on Twitter. That's at Anthony Zanfini. Everything starts there and leads to everything else. So it's good.
Awesome. Good stuff. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for joining us and watching us. We look forward to bringing you more conversations starting next week. Again, my name is Kareem Kanji. You can follow me on Twitter at Kareem Kanji. We'll talk with you soon. Bye-bye.